And some of those discovery questions have to do with things like what energizes you and what drains you. It used to be you didn't have a personal brand. You had a company brand. I think you know in your heart, maybe before you even admit it out loud to yourself, you probably kind of know that something doesn't feel right. The decision to pivot doesn't happen overnight, that it's okay for you to surround yourself with some of the people that you choose and start your own personal advisory board. Men do this all the time, always have. They use their networks to find their next client, to find their next job. It's never perfect.
Pivoting sounds exciting when you say it after the fact. You left the job, started the business, changed industries, finally went after that thing you've been thinking about for years. But while you're actually living it, it can feel messy, uncertain, and honestly, a little terrifying. I know firsthand, over the past year and a half, I've experienced the highs of building something new and the moments when I've questioned whether I should just throw in the towel and go find another corporate job. In this episode, I'm talking with Trish Barber, author of Why Women Pivot, about what it really takes to make a change, whether the pivot is your choice or one you never saw coming. We talk about rebuilding your identity beyond a title, discovering what actually energizes you, owning your story, and surrounding yourself with the people who will challenge, encourage, and guide you through what comes next. Because a pivot isn't just one brave decision. It's a process, and you do not have to have every part of it figured out before you begin. Welcome to Loud and Lifted, Trish. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, so this is a very fun topic to talk about, and maybe we glamorize the ideas of pivoting, right? But there's a lot that goes into it, so much that you've literally written a book about this, which I love so much. So we're going to get into that pivoting isn't always sunshine and roses and this glamorous thing, right? There's a lot of emotional and mental pieces that go through this. But before we get into that part, the messy part, let's start at the very beginning. Why do women pivot? And why does it seem like we're talking about this so much more right now?
Well, COVID kind of was a catalyst for a lot of pivots, but I mean, the reality is that we're the ones who have children. We're the ones who take care of our families often. We're the ones who carry the mental load associated with managing families. And so the reality is that that stuff takes its toll, and opportunities are either made available for women that meet their circumstances and their needs, or they're not. And there is just a lot of reason why women have to, and frankly, conditions associated with women who are making pivots. If you're leaving on maternity leave, you're starting and stopping your career for a temporary period of time. And the reality of you coming back, there are consequences associated with that. And as much as we have come a long way, and there are a lot of great reasons why companies are doing that so much better than they used to, there are penalties that women pay for these pauses that we have to make. And so we're pivoting so that we can find the opportunities we're looking for given the circumstances that we're dealing with.
You know, it's funny, I'm showing my age when I say this, but, you know, the whole having babies, that was 15 years ago for me. And you're right, when I go back to that time of how your priorities shift and how you're managing work and the whole juggling. And at that time, I'm being like, I knew I always wanted to work. I knew that was my thing to do, but I never thought that there was other opportunities back then, right? Like, and it's funny how in 10, 15 years, women are starting to realize like, wait, I don't have to deal with this. I don't have to deal with this 8 to 5 grind and the constant corporate piece of it. So it's funny how I've been so focused on that. I'm in my 40s. You know, what does pivoting look like for me now? And we'll get into that a little bit. But you're right. That first sort of flag that people start to raise is when they have babies.
Yep. Yeah. And, and many of us are caring for elderly parents, or, there are just circumstances. And women, I think there's enough research out there to suggest that women are carrying a lot of the mental load that goes along with that. And so I don't know about you, but a lot of the women that I know don't want to miss out on,
Right.
on some of those things. So as much as they understand that there may be penalties associated with it, you take that and you make changes accordingly.
And why do you think that is? And maybe again, it's my age that it seems like women are just less tolerant of not being able to have that ability to focus on what they think is most important. So is it just me and my age of feeling like women in their 40s are sort of like, you know what, I'm leaving corporate, I'm leaving my government job or whatever it is, and I'm going to pivot. So I don't know if you're seeing that or if that's just the little world I'm living in currently.
It's funny because I'm probably my kids are 30, 28, and 23. And so I'm definitely at the further end of the spectrum. And I'm even pivoting now, finding myself kind of asking a lot of questions about, well, what do I want to do next? Because my kids are having children. I want to see my grandbabies. But I still want to engage in my career. And so I don't think the good news, bad news, ladies, is that it doesn't end.
I love that.
It kind of never ends. But that just means that I think we all get better at it as we go too.
Oh, that's such a great point. It's not like you had to pivot when you had kids, or it has to be, let's call it middle career, but it can be at any point, even if you're towards retirement age, or maybe if you are retiring, there's still that opportunity to pivot. There's not like a age or a time limit on it. So that's so true. I love that. So besides the pivot of, hey, I decided I'm fed up with this, I don't want to be in this situation. What about the other one when all of a sudden, surprise, our company downsizes, we're let go, and we're sitting there being like, holy shit, what are we doing next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have been on both ends of that spectrum. I've been part of companies that had to make some of those hard decisions. And then I've also been, one of the people who was impacted by that. And that is the current reality. I mean, that is where we all are now. So I think that, and frankly, I live outside of Washington, D.C., and the current market around here is there's a lot of people out of work who were government employees and are now out of work and are having to rethink their career, and having government experience and translating that into private sector experience is really challenging. So it is it as much as we say it's an opportunity, I know that sounds trite to the people that are out there looking, but the reality is that it is an opportunity, and that inflection or those self-discovery questions, that once you go through that emotional cycle, which is real, right? That whole emotional cycle that happens once you are impacted by a downsizing. Then you get to ask yourself some self-discovery questions that help you really think about what you want to change and what opportunities you want to take advantage of. And some of those discovery questions have to do with things like what energizes you and what drains you, and what kinds of things have people said to you or asked for your help with in the past. What do you receive compliments about from other people? Like, oh, you're so organized, or oh, you're so good at conveying information, or whatever that is. Like, synthesizing, at taking inventory on a lot of that stuff and synthesizing it, and then figuring out where to take it from there helps you craft a thing that looks more of what energizes you, less of what drains you. And it's a process, and it's hard, and it's emotional, but it's you come out the other end, I think, a little better for it.
No, that's so important. And that's the beginning of this roadmap, right? If you have to pivot by force or by choice, and the beginning, especially if it's by choice, you're like, yeah, let's go. This is exciting. This is something new. But you have to prepare for it. And I love that idea of having that discovery conversation with yourself. And I mean, do you write this stuff down? Like, this doesn't have to be a whiteboard session, right? But how do you sort of like make sure you're being honest and fair with yourself, because a lot of times we want to minimize, especially if this was a forced pivot, right? You're feeling down, you're feeling like you aren't able to contribute or whatever. So how do you make sure that you really have that honest conversation? And do we talk to other people too? Like, how do we just make sure that discovery is really important?
Yeah, I think networking is such an important part of this. And as someone who pivoted from the private sector into government adjacent client work, I had to learn how to talk to those kinds of people. And I needed to learn how to be in the spaces where those kinds of people were. And so networking became a big part of it for me. And there was a whole vocabulary that comes with getting involved in a new industry or in a new sector. And so doing some discovery as an entrepreneur, this is very much an entrepreneurial principle that applies here, is that you're constantly doing customer discovery and talking to customers to find out what problem they're having so that you can think of how to solve the problem. It's the same thing when you're going through this process of asking yourself or asking people in that industry questions about where opportunities are, what struggles are top of mind, what are priorities in that particular industry, so that you know where you can potentially contribute. So you're taking that list that the self-discovery list that you created and comparing it to the list or the things you're learning in having discovery conversations, and you're finding where those intersection points may be and where you may be able to have an impact.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. And it's so funny, as a background as a marketing person, I feel like this is like a product lunch, right? Like it's knowing who you are, what you're good at, the strengths of the brand, which is yourself, knowing what's the customer or the industry expectations is, and matching that. So, and I think a lot of people, even if you're not in marketing, you can relate to that when you launch something new at your company, is making sure that matches, and it's doing that for yourself, which is kind of like, oh, wait, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that whole topic of personal branding is so top of mind right now. And that means so many different things to so many different people. A lot of people think it means I have to be posting on social media all the time, but the reality is that, and this is where I'll show my age, it used to be you didn't have a personal brand. You had a company brand, and you were, towing the company brand line. Now that we're all sort of unleashed to develop our own personal brand, everyone's really confused about how to do that and what that really means. I think if I were to give anyone advice about that, what I would say is that think about the things that you want to convey about what you're doing, what you're thinking about, what you find important, and anything that you would post or get involved in should align with those values. And so any social media, if you choose to do it, great. If you don't choose to do it, great. But the places you show up to network should align. The places that you choose to, or the kinds of social media posts that you do, should align. The kinds of things you're reading should align, because then you'll be in a much better position to be able to talk about them.
That's great advice. And whether you're looking for a job this week or maybe it's years down the road, but just building that brand for yourself is so important. And you're so right. Many of us get connected to our company, and that we think is our brand or our title. You get really fixated on a title. And, I felt like I was going to have this identity crisis when I left a CEO job, that it was very visible. I'm like, well, now what? Like, I don't have the title or the company association. And you learn what was transactional and what's real, but you start to build on like what already existed, that like, no, you're a person. People care about other people. But it was getting really intentional of like, okay, who am I? What am I doing? To your point, like, what's the need out there? And, my pivot the last year and a half has been a lot of trial and error, right? Like, it's not like I decided 30 days into it, here's my plan, here's what I'm doing, let's go. It's been this up and down roller coaster of, sometimes I'm like, woohoo, this is amazing. Other days I'm like, oh my God, maybe I should go get a full-time corporate job, right? Like it's not perfect.
Yeah, no. And, you're raising sort of the whole reason, or one of the reasons why I decided I wanted to write this book, is that it's never perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like I often I am my own worst critic, right?
Sure.
So you're inclined to find out or figure out all the reasons why this didn't work the way you wanted it to work. But the reality is that trial and error and doing a little bit of exploration is all part of it, and giving yourself grace as part of that is all part of it too.
So what is part of that journey? We're kind of touching on that. We make the decision, you're pivoting, you're going to become an entrepreneur, you're going to do your own thing. And then we've done the discovery, we're talking to our network, we're building that out and what the need is out there. But then what do we do?
So I am in Virginia, and there is a whole entrepreneur ecosystem in the state of Virginia. But regardless of whether you're in Virginia or not, there's a whole entrepreneur ecosystem in whatever state you're in. Some of it is more robust in some places than others. But if entrepreneurship is a goal, I think, trying to understand and identify, there's sort of 5 big things that you have to think about. There's validating a market, there's creating a team, there's creating an MVP or a minimum viable product, there's finding partners and or funding opportunities, and then there's, developing a pipeline and traction. So all of those things are part of the journey and part of the stuff that we all have to think about if we're going to be entrepreneurs. You go through those processes, and the entrepreneur ecosystem in your state will most likely, the Small Business Development Association is usually the federal organization that funds some of the state level stuff. So I would start with the SBDC and then look for those opportunities in your state. And they're often free programs that you can take advantage of.
Interesting. That's great. Well, and I was thinking too, when we were talking a point or two earlier about how even if you're in a corporate job, government, whatever it is, and we all have those seasons of the good and the bad. Sometimes you love your job. Some days you come home and you're like, why am I doing this? So how, before we do make that leap, we'll take a step back. How do we know, like, look, this isn't just a season. Like, how do we know that we really need a pivot?
I think in your heart, maybe before you even admit it out loud to yourself, you probably kind of know that something doesn't feel right. Something is not lining up for me now. I shouldn't have to work this hard, or these physical symptoms I'm feeling, shouldn't be there. Or, I talked to a woman at one point who was having a lot of issues. She was literally vomiting at some points during the day because she was so stressed out by trying to juggle it all. So, regardless of what your symptoms, you kind of know in your heart that there's something, an itch that you kind of need to scratch. And I think at some point, something pushes you over the edge, whether it's, okay, I am definitely not making enough money, or I am definitely missing too much time with my kids, or I am definitely not getting the opportunities that I'm seeking. That's when, you kind of know it's time to make. But to the point you made before, Betsy, I really want to come back to, and that was the one of, it takes some time to make this all happen. And you're raising that now as an issue. Okay, when do you throw up your hands and say you're fed up? But it also takes some time to tee yourself up for success. And so that idea of personal branding, like, that's not something that happens overnight. The decision to pivot doesn't happen overnight either. And so as long as you're doing some work along the way to align yourself with the kinds of things that you're attracted to, sometimes you don't even know why. Right? That you're attracted to them, but you're exploring, and you just kind of have to let some of that exploration happen. And then eventually it starts to come together.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think back to, I was probably a couple months out of my past job, and I had coffee with a woman who, same thing, left big corporate job, started her own thing. She does like professional development coaching. So I met with her. She had been on her own for a couple years now. And I was, kind of like in the panic mode of, I don't have this figured out. I'm not moving forward. I don't know what to do. And she was like, you need to be patient. She's like, this doesn't happen overnight. Like, yes, you've made a decision. Yes, you think or thought you have a plan, and that's great. But like, you're not going to be firing in all cylinders in 6 months. And I was like, well, I'm not patient. And she's like, welcome.
No, and many of us aren't, and that is it's a super frustrating process. That is a reality of it. That's the hard part.
Yeah. And that roller coaster continues. I mean, a few months ago, I was like, I've gotten everything figured out for the most part, right? I have the right cadence, I have the right business mix, and then all of a sudden I lose a big client. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, that was half of my revenue. Well, now what do? Do I throw in the towel? And I've had this panic, it's like this high on the top of the roller coaster, and then you come plummeting down, and it was like, okay, just chill. Like, we'll figure this out. But we make pivoting and doing your own thing sound very glamorous, and there's parts that are, but like that a roller coaster and being on your own is very different. That from somebody who spent 20 some years in corporate organizations where you could, I don't want to say hide behind a paycheck. The paycheck could always go away, but it was more stable than when you're on your own. So I think it's really important to be transparent about that. What that really looks like.
Well, even doing little things. This was a little thing that a coach of mine suggested that I do when I would get down on myself and things weren't happening fast enough. And she was like saying, well, what did happen this week that was positive? And I was actually able to say, come up with a couple of examples. And she's like, why don't you try to, if you're a journaler, try writing that down, try to do. And it actually turned into a habit of mine. I do keep a book, a notebook all the time on my desk. And I, at the end of the day, would just make a point of writing down and highlighting the thing that went really well that day for me. And then when I flip back through my notebook, I actually see the highlighted stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I guess I did accomplish something.
Yes.
In the grand scheme of things. Sometimes those, 2 steps forward, 1 step back is really frustrating. But then when you see some of the fruits of that in small pieces, that makes a big difference.
Oh, I love that. And that has come up on other episodes where, call it your gratitude journal, your wins journal. I've talked about a victory folder, but we're all so busy, we're moving so quickly, and it's easy to get fixated on the things that aren't going right. But having that list of like, hey, this is where I kicked butt, these are the things I did, it just helps to, 1, build confidence, which is important, and 2, just helps you to keep that optimistic move forward, let's solve the problem type of approach. So I love that you mentioned that. So let's talk about the other piece of this, is owning the story. So whether it was a forced or choice pivot, people like to talk and have lots of opinion of what are you doing and why did you leave that? So how do we own our story when we pivot?
Yeah, so having your pivot story straight takes a little time. So, but the tone of it needs to be confident and forward looking and, curious, and you don't have all of the answers. Like that sort of tone, I think is really important. I think that the best advice I would give for that is that it can't sound wounded. So if you are a person who had just lost a job, saying, I'm out of work is not the same as I'm learning how to apply my skills in XYZ thing to this industry. And I'm wondering if you can spend a couple minutes with me talking about or giving me feedback on that. So I think that is obviously in the form of a question to somebody that you're doing some discovery with, but your pivot story can be, I'm learning how to apply my 25 years of experience in XYZ to this industry, and I'm out there networking and talking to companies about it now. So, and that's a lot more positive than I lost my job and I'm not really sure what I'm going to do now, right?
Well, it's funny that you say that. I have a coaching client that I'm working with, and she's been in marketing type roles for like 10, 15 years. She's in her 30s, and she lost her job, and she knew it was coming. So she started to prepare and plan. And one of the first things we did was she wanted to pivot into more of like a community relations nonprofit type of world, relationships. She had pieces of that in her previous job, but it was not her whole job. So we spent a lot of time like talking through the talking points, and it wasn't contrived or wasn't fake. It was pulling out what she really had, and then being intentional with how was her resume structured? What was her LinkedIn post when she announced on LinkedIn that she was looking for her next opportunity? It was, and she's a very positive like optimistic, outgoing person. And that came through in her post like, hey, I'm so excited. I'm looking for my next opportunity where I can utilize these skills and help a company do X, Y, and Z. And, right away, people were reaching out to her to help connect the dots. And nobody was ever like, oh my God, what happened? I mean, maybe people ask that behind the scenes, but she positioned this in such a positive opportunity, like, let's go. And she is very excited, right? Like of course it's very scary at first, but now she's like, this is my opportunity. I've been wanting to do something like this for years. And now maybe she was pushed, right? Maybe she wasn't ready, but she has that opportunity now to pivot and control that story.
Yep. Yeah. And that's controlling the story, I think, is a little bit of what we're saying here, but not in a way that makes it sound like you're embarrassed,
right,
or that there's anything wrong with, or unusual about the circumstances you're finding yourself in. But what's the bright side of that? Where are you taking it? And that's the part of the story that you have to think about.
Absolutely. And, I think that even ties if it's a choice and you had a big title at a corporate job, and it could be your own friends and family, right? Who are like, what are you doing? Why would you leave that big paycheck that was stable? I mean, it's that part of it too, especially if you're a little vague on what you're doing, then people question like, why would you walk away from that?
Yes, you're saying all the right things, but I do think just tone and, picking yourself up by your bootstraps a little bit each day to make sure that you have that story, and the story will evolve, right?
Sure.
Like that's kind of part of it too, is the story evolves, but the positive side of where you want to go is what you should be weaving into that pivot story.
I love that. So for the woman who's listening to this and knows something has to change, but is scared or thinks it's too late, we already identified it's never too late, right? What's the one thing that you want her to hear?
I had someone said to me the words personal advisory board at some point, and I was like, what is a personal advisory board? But the whole concept was so amazing to me. And I immediately, for people who have formal mentors or have had mentors in their career, you have those people already in your orbit. But the reality is not everyone does. Not everyone's exposed to those kind of programs. Not everyone has mentors and advisors. And my point is that it's okay for you to surround yourself with some of the people that you choose, and start your own personal advisory board. And that needs to include somebody who's going to challenge you. It needs to include somebody who's going to be your cheerleader and root for you. It needs to include somebody who's going to ask you a lot of questions so that you can kind of get your story straight. And it just needs to include a lot of different kinds of personalities, because that is a journey. The whole thing is a journey, and you're going to need all of those different kind of people as you go through it. So my advice is to start thinking about, who do you have on your personal advisory board? It's not necessarily, it's certainly not a paid position, right? To be your personal advisory board.
Maybe coffee, compaying coffee.
Yeah, maybe a coffee. Yes, absolutely. And I think, but just, reaching out to people and saying, I'm, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going. You have always been this, to me. I would love to use you as a sounding board. And the reality is people will help. You know what it's like when something happens to someone. You always say, okay, let me know what I can do. But the reality is if you tell them what you want them to do, then you actually usually get better results. So helping your personal advisory board know what role you want them to play is really helpful. And you can tell them, I want you to challenge me. I want you to be the person who makes me feel better and has coffee with me once a month. I want you to be the person who asks me questions and lets me role play with you, whatever that may be. But those are the kind of people that you need to surround yourself with. And that was breakthrough for me. Anybody who doesn't like asking for help, I'm sure, appreciates it.
Right. You talk about a personal advisory board, and I use the same concept. I call it a circle, and who's in your circle. And it's so funny. As you were saying that, I say the same thing: a truth teller, a connector, a cheerleader, right? So it all is around that thing of no one's doing this alone. We need people to give us different perspectives, sometimes to build us up, sometimes to push us. But the personal advisory board is such a great title for that. And I think so often we get hung up on mentors, which are important 100%. But it's that advisory board that you might talk to once or twice a year, but who's going to give you that feedback that you can shoot an email to, whatever it is, to have that relationship, but will give you, who knows who you are and knows your strengths. So I love titling that a perfect advisory board. And I 100% agree. You need to have people with different perspectives, different ages, industries, right? Like there's always that piece of it.
The ages thing is a big one, I think, right now, because as a person who is older but has been involved in technology, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm struggling to keep up in this AI environment. And while I think that AI offers a huge opportunity, having young people on my personal advisory board to say, is this how you use this? Would you do it this way? Show me how you've done it. So using having young people in that circle is absolutely an important one.
That's so interesting that you're saying, as somebody who is older, that you would have younger people, a different experience, but they're going to bring a different perspective. So that's such a great point, because I think so often, especially with mentors, we think older, somebody with more experience. It just has to be different experience. It doesn't have to be more. So that's a great point. Oh, that's awesome. So this has been so much great advice on why we do it, how we do it, that roadmap. Is there any other final takeaway that you think women who are thinking about pivoting or just pivoted need to know, besides reading your book, obviously, which we'll put in the show notes?
I guess the idea of, we just kind of touched on this idea of women being comfortable asking for help, and men do this all the time, always have. They use their networks to find their next client, to find their next job. We as women tend not to be as comfortable doing that. Not everything should be transactional. Yeah. And that's absolutely not what I'm saying. But a big thing that I wanted to convey in my book was that as a woman who in corporate environments, most of my mentors and the people that I turned to were men. Most of the women that I had in my network were counterexamples for me. And so I do think that in this environment, it's very important that we are out there taking care of each other, because programs are being eliminated, opportunities are starting to disappear, and who better than us to take care of other women who are, on the struggle bus with us and trying to figure all of this out. So I would just encourage people to think twice about taking a woman under your wing and, finding a way to support them and doing something positive for women every week, I think is something that will come back and pay you in spades.
Oh, I love that. That's so true and such amazing advice. Trish, thank you so much for being here. We will link your book. We appreciate you being part of Loud and Lifted.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Betsy. Have a great one.
What I appreciated most about this conversation is the reminder that pivoting isn't a straight line. You can feel completely confident one week and question every decision you've made the next. That doesn't mean pivoting is failing. It means you're still building, learning, and figuring out what fits. I also love Trish's idea of creating a personal advisory board, the people who will cheer you, challenge you, ask the right questions, and help you see what you might not be able to see on your own. Because no matter what your next chapter looks like, you should not have to navigate it alone. You can find Trish's book, Why Women Pivot, along with more information about her in the show notes. And if this episode made you think of a woman who's in the middle of her own pivot, send it to her. She may need the reminder that it's not too late and she does not have to have it all figured out just yet, or do it alone. Until next time, stay loud and stay lifted.